Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss a couple of stories which broke this weekend, yesterday basically, which indicate that the government has at least privately accepted that the current Brexit path is totally unsustainable. This is absolutely massive. First, there was the news that Sunak has been ordering officials to come up with ways to work on closer ties with the EU, and the big one in the Observer this morning, but we saw it digitally last night, reports on a secret meeting, a two-day conference, which took place between senior members of the government and senior members of Labour, as well as others, to confront the problems of Brexit. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So there are more questions than answers here, I'm afraid, but this is absolutely momentous. And it's a bit of a shame. This arguably is the biggest Brexit story I have discussed since we left the EU. And yet I'm doing it on my graveyard slot. I couldn't really leave this till tomorrow. And also, I think people will just look at it as, it's just one of those, because it's a conference. Political conferences are boring. But the ramifications are massive. You know, these two events have been occurring behind closed doors, so we don't have all the answers and without much in the way of comment to the public. But it is an absolutely momentous shift in Brexit policy. First things first, the news that Rishi Sunak had asked senior ministers and officials to draw up plans for rebuilding the UK's relations with the EU. Bear in mind, under Boris Johnson, there was a deliberate campaign to damage relations with the EU. You know, and the ERG drove this. They wanted that. They wanted to make it as difficult as possible to go back to the EU. That's why they're trying to join the CPTPP, to make it hard to rejoin the customs union. That's why they forced Johnson to sabre rattle all the time, so that the EU wouldn't want us back. Well, you know, mission accomplished there for a while anyway. But according to the article that I was reading anyway, an official said that, you know, this change wasn't an admission that Brexit had been a failure, but it was just a reflection of changing reality. Now, I could be a bit glib here and say, well, is the change in reality that you thought the EU would sacrifice the integrity of their single market for the sake of a petulant island off their north coast? And now the reality is that the EU are getting ready to dissolve the very flimsy deal we do have with them if we do the same with the withdrawal agreement. However, most Tories knew it was all a nonsense from the start. You know, they didn't believe their own lies, so the change in reality will be something else. Is it European security after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine? Could be, and certainly disunity amongst the major powers of Europe can only help its enemies, with Russia the main beneficiary. But the EU offered the UK a security deal during the Brexit process. The Tories turned it down. We could easily pick it back up again. It's in everyone's interest. Is this the plan that Sunak has asked his government to work on? Maybe. But then we come to this secret meeting last week. Senior members of the government met figures from Labour Party, including David Lammy, defence experts and business leaders. Now, obviously, the presence of defence experts suggests, yes, security deal is definitely part of Sunak's plans. But the presence of business leaders means a much wider rethink of Brexit. And politically, there are two very curious aspects to both pieces of news. The first is that Sunak has been involving senior members of his government. That can only mean, of course, cabinet ministers. Now, obviously, he would have to do that in order to pursue any of these plans anyway. But it suggests that the cabinet are fully in favour of it. They are not the full-throttle Brexit crowd that has been the case since the election of 2019. All Tory MPs had to publicly nail their colours to the mast of not just Brexit, but Boris Johnson's hard Brexit in order to be allowed to stand as a candidate for the party. You know, we have had several years where Tory MPs and certainly ministers were simply not permitted to question Brexit at all. You weren't even allowed to say, oh yeah, that bit's gone wrong. You know, all they could do, the furthest they could go was saying we haven't quite unlocked all the benefits yet. The only one who has actually been honest about Brexit to any level is Tobias Ellwood, who has been actively calling for us to rejoin the single market for the past year. But he has been a lone voice in the parliamentary party, with none of his colleagues coming out in support at all. But it appears that Conservative MPs right at the top of the government are now actively working to change direction in a fairly major way on both defence and trade. which is momentous. Because it's not just that Brexit isn't working. Can't just be that. Brexit hasn't been working from the start, yet there was no course correction made. Even now, these efforts were secret until they were reported in the media. But lots of things aren't working, yet the Conservatives continue to double down. Public services aren't working. Our COVID response isn't working. Our asylum and immigration policies are spectacularly not working. But the Conservatives forge ahead down the wrong road there. So this isn't about having any concerns for what's working or not. If this were just an admission that Brexit is bad for the economy, for example, then they would be facing up to the other challenges to the economy as well. And also consider that this news will go down very badly amongst certain corners of the Tory party. I've not seen anything yet, but I fully expect over the course of today to see a lot of gnashing of teeth from some Tory MPs over the course of today and the rest of this week. Sunak must have known the news would come out. He must have known what the reaction would be, so why do it? To my mind, can only be because Brexit isn't just failing in terms of economics and security, but politically. We've seen a very steady and consistent change in public attitude to Brexit over the past couple of years in particular. The Tories have been the luckiest of all chancers in that they had a pandemic and war in Europe to hide the failings of Brexit behind. Imagine if the past few years had just been normal, globally speaking, just normal people chugging along. What would their excuses have been then? Brexit would have been much more badly exposed. No smoke screens to hide it behind. But the Brexiteers had two major jolts to the system so that they could muddy the waters. But it's not enough. People can see that Brexit has made us more vulnerable. And if Brexit is failing politically, when there are other events to hide it behind, what's it going to be like when we enter a period of relative calm internationally? You know, this is what's happening here. The public are shifting, politicians are following. Rishi Sunak has organised this 2-day summit to ask a question. How can we work better with Europe? This is a complete about-face from the previous policy. I want people to focus on this thing. Ever since 2016, it has been government policy for everything, for every aspect of government. It's been government policy to try and work out how can we manage without Europe. You know, it was always about we will compensate for the lost trade elsewhere. You know, the US trade deal, the trade deals around the world. It was always about how can we manage without Europe? How can we do without Europe? Now it's the opposite. The question asked at this summit was, how can we work closer with Europe? You know, and I keep sort of saying when I talk about the Brexit process, it's going to happen incrementally. What people need to focus on is not where we are, but which way we're facing. For the last 6.5 years, we've been facing with that away from Europe. Rishi Sunak, in 1 week, has turned us to face towards it. That is now the direction of travel. And that's what I think people should spend more time thinking about. Lots of people throwing their hands up in despair going, it's obvious the damage that Brexit's doing. Why do you need a conference? I could have told you that. In fact, I have been telling you that for years. Just reverse it, for goodness sake. Yeah, but that's not how politics works, is it? I've said this before. It never ceases to amaze me just how upset anti-Brexit commentators get when big wins like this come along. It's like rejoiners. You know where we say how Brexiteers seem to be the most pissed off about Brexit? Well, you won. It's like, well, rejoiners are getting pissed off about rejoining. It's like they're pissed off when we start to turn away from the destructive path that we've argued against for so many years. Ever since the referendum, the government's formal policy on everything has been to work out a way to manage without a close relationship with our entire continent. With one secret 2-day conference last week, that has changed 180 degrees. How is that not momentous news? There are people saying, how can the politicians need this conference to work out what's going wrong? I ask, why can't these same people see that this conference did not happen to work out how to improve things? It wasn't trying to work out how we can improve things economically or security-wise. If it were, why would they invite people from Labour? They wouldn't. They don't need to. They've got the defence experts there to work out how can we work more closely with the EU on defence. They've got the business experts there to work out what can we do to improve trade. They don't need people from Labour. The governments could have held their discussions with the business and defence experts and come up with their own plans. Ask yourself why they invited figures from Labour, including David Lammy. It's not because of the economic or security damage of Brexit, but because of the political damage. The Observer article claims that the introductory statement for the conference included a line acknowledging that Brexit was acting as a drag on our growth and inhibiting the UK's potential. They also talked to someone who was in attendance who said that the main focus was the economic harms caused by Brexit. So although a security deal probably is in Sunak's mind, it's clear that he is facing up to the economic damage as well. From what I can tell from this article, the heavy implication is people were being quite honest in a way that they aren't in public. So I go back to these changing circumstances. So Russia's invasion of Ukraine, clearly one of them, but that's mostly a security measure. What if the other change in circumstances is America's Inflation Reduction Act? You know, this massive stimulus program for US-produced green technology presents a massive threat to Europe. The EU has immediately responded to this push to corner the future market on green technology. They've been discussing ways in which they will need to adapt their own rules to make sure that they don't get left behind. But the UK can't really do very much at all on its own. We can't stand up to the United States. We can't compete. The EU has the resources to reform and meet this new challenge. A single country like the UK does not. And perhaps this is one of the reasons why the government has flipped its position now. An awareness that we are at a crucial junction here as we enter a new era where a new industry is about to emerge. The Tories pissed away our position in computing during the 80s. Maybe they don't want to make the same mistake again. But whatever the reason, the hard Brexit is now dead. That's what this is. It's dead. It's gone. You know, once we left the EU, we were never going to fully reverse it in one step or even just two or three. Lots has to happen to reverse it now. Attitudes have to change, not just in the UK, although this is where it has to start. But the hard Brexit period is now over. The government have a formal policy of working on ways towards a closer relationship with Europe. Yes, it was done in secret, but that is still their direction of travel. I didn't think this process could begin until Labour took over. Even very recently, I was concerned at the scale of the challenge that would face them, how 2 more years of divergence from the EU was still to come. But assuming that the ERG cannot derail this initiative, and they would like to, you would think Sunak would not have made this move unless he thought he had a lot of support from within his party. And that means that not only may we not get any more divergence, we might actually get some alignment before the next election. Do you know what this also means? None of this initiative last week, which will cost him politically, he will now get it in the neck from the ERG. Why would he do that if he intends to go ahead, for example, with the retained EU law bill? That wouldn't make any sense at all. Would not make any sense at all. So what I think is we can expect more rapid progress from Labour in their first term because some of the work will hopefully have already been done. Because I've got 2 final points here. First, maybe Sunak invited figures from Labour because he plans to, if necessary, stand up to the ERG, if he feels he has to, and push some things through with Labour votes. He's clearly not ready for the battle yet, otherwise he would not be keeping senior members of the group in his cabinet. He doesn't want to, publicly go against them yet. He may never do, but I cannot understand the reason for this conference if he's not prepared to. So he may be preparing himself for that. It might be a fanciful notion, you say. But I would have thought the same about the idea of a 2-day conference inviting members of Labour to discuss why Brexit's a load of crap before I read that it had actually happened. My second thought here, is that perhaps Sunak worries about the long-term reputational damage to the Conservative Party of being associated with the failed hard Brexit and Labour getting the plaudits for improving our competitiveness with their more pragmatic approach. Perhaps he wants to get the ball rolling so the Tories can claim that the new approach was a joint effort, that they went through the difficult, we had to try different things out. It was very new, no one's ever done this before. No, because no one's been that insane. But, we worked things out and actually we got the ball rolling. So for the next election when they're trying to win it, it's actually, you'll find that Labour are just benefiting from things we put into place first. Maybe there's a bit of that in it. Who knows? But this really is quite spectacular news that I fear is just not getting the attention that it should. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.